tonight, will lawyers become irrelevant? Moderating our debate and our host tonight is Raoul Soames. He's the co-founder of the Disruptive Business Network, an event series that asks the question, what if the status quo is wrong? DBN investigates how new ideas and technology are changing business and the world of work, and that's exactly the reason that we're here tonight. So please join me in welcoming our moderator, Raoul.
Thank you, Sky. And thank you all for coming this evening. It's great to be back for our third and final debate of 2018 at the State Library. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge and thank the Start Space team who are here, Adele, who've been fantastic to partner with, and also to Sky, who's been great to work with, and for all her help. If you could please give them and as Sky mentioned, this series is about investigating topics that will be important to us as we navigate the future of work, which brings us to tonight's topic, will lawyers be irrelevant? And now on the surface, that motion seems ridiculous. Lawyers have been essential to the fabric of society for the last 1,000 years. But as the author Richard Susskind notes, the legal profession is going through more change in the next 20 years than it has in the last 200. Thanks to technology, new processes, changing business models, the delivery of legal services is undergoing an unprecedented transformation. And this could mean that lawyers, as we commonly understand the term, could be left by the wayside. However, on the other hand, the crucial elements of the legal realm, whether it's differentiated expertise, experience, skills, and judgment, one would hope will remain perennial. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with an excellent debate topic. Will lawyers, yes or no to the statement, lawyers will be irrelevant? And the way tonight is going to unfold, it's going to be an Oxford-style debate, which means that there will be 3 rounds. Round 1, each speaker, starting with the affirmative sides, gets a 7-minute opening argument. Round 2 is questions from myself and you, the audience. And round 3 is a 2-minute closing argument. And now, you, the audience, will vote before and after the debate. And whichever team moves the most votes in percentage points wins. So to introduce our debaters, arguing for the affirmative, we have Katie Miller. Katie is currently the Deputy Commissioner at the Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission. She is an enthusiastic advocate of using technology to challenge the way lawyers and government work. In 2015, as president of the Law Institute of Victoria, she championed the cause of change within the legal profession and encouraged lawyers to adapt to change and digital disruption through innovation and greater use of technology. She continues to present to lawyers, law students, and public servants about why and how innovation is a necessary part of legal and public service. Katie is also a LIV-accredited specialist in administrative law and chairs the LIV-accredited Specialization Board. She is also an occasional guest host of Writs and Cures on ABC 774. Katie Miller. Her partner this evening is Annabelle Tresize. Annabelle is an admitted lawyer and currently an associate to a judge of the Supreme Court of Victoria. She is very interested in the intersection between law and technology and finding creative solutions to streamline problems and accelerate access to justice. In 2017, she created a legal app to help self-represented litigants navigate their way through the federal court bankruptcy system. Annabelle is very interested in law, AI, and ethics. From late 2017, she was a researcher with the Dean of Swinburne Law and has helped co-author papers on technology, law, ethics at Swinburne and Melbourne Law School. Annabelle is also a member of the Responsible AI group and spoke at their AI and ethics panel earlier this year. Annabelle. And our debaters arguing against the motion, we have Julian Webb. Julian Webb joined Melbourne Law School in 2014, having previously held chairs at the universities of Warwick and Westminster in the UK. He also holds concurrent appointments as an honorary law professor of law at the University of Exeter and a visiting professor at the University of Derby. He was awarded his LLM and LLD degrees by the University of Warwick and is both a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and an academic bencher of the Honourable Society of the Inner Temple. Julian currently teaches legal ethics and legal theory on the JD program and has particular research interests in the ethics and professional regulation of lawyers, developments in the market for legal services, the political economy of legal education, and in regulatory theory and practice more generally. Julian Webb. And last but not least, arguing for the negative, is Tara Swamba. Tara has completed an LLB with honors. Her thesis explored the inherent tension between the increasing speed at which society is changing against the need for law to progress slowly in order to create stability and consistency. She's an advocate, a writer, a public speaker, and tutors administrative law at La Trobe University. Her interest in law is primarily human rights, arts, and technology focused. Tara is also currently studying C# programming to create interactive VR landscapes as an empathy tool. Please welcome Tara. And now, as I mentioned, you are in charge, so you get to decide the outcome of this debate. Could you please welcome our first speaker, Katie Miller. Katie?
Thank you, Raoul. And I'm going to start by doing the traditional public service disclaimer. Anything I say tonight is my opinion and my opinion alone and should not be attributed to our Anti-Corruption Commission. Friends, I come before you today with a confession to make. In my life, I have used lawyers. When my husband and I bought our house, we used a lawyer. When we wrote our wills, we used a lawyer. I used a lawyer when I knew I didn't need to. And I used a lawyer because as a lawyer myself, I couldn't bring myself to accept that things like buying a house and writing a will no longer needed a lawyer. Friends, tonight I acknowledge what I have not been able to acknowledge before, that I didn't need a lawyer to buy a house and I didn't need a lawyer to write a will. And I chose a lawyer because it was more convenient than accepting the truth, that lawyers are irrelevant. In choosing to use lawyers, I'm in the minority. In 2012, the New South Wales Law and Justice Foundation found that in any given year, 1 in 3 people will have a problem to which there is a legal solution. Now, of those people, only half of them will recognise that they have a problem with a legal solution. And then of that half, only 1 in 3 people go on to use a lawyer. In other words, of the people who have a problem with a legal solution, only 16% will use a lawyer to solve that problem. And I'm here tonight to argue that lawyers are irrelevant because clients think they are irrelevant to solve their legal problems. Now, traditionally, lawyers have played 3 roles for clients. They have been gatekeepers of information, they have performed legal transactions, and they have solved problems. And tonight, I will explain why each of these roles either are or is quickly becoming irrelevant. So first, lawyers as gatekeepers of information. For centuries, people went to lawyers because they were the only people who knew what the law was. Many people couldn't read, and for those who could, the law wasn't written down in a convenient place. Much of the law was developed by courts and wasn't even written down at all. Indeed, to this day, England does not have a written constitution. Now, the situation today in Australia could not be more different. In a country like Australia, we have almost 100% universal literacy. The majority of our laws have been codified in statutes which are published freely on government websites and through OSLI. Governments take seriously their obligation to not only make the laws, but ensure that people know what the law is and what they can do within it. If you want to find out how to do things like get a driver's licence, be registered as a builder, or what you can put in your will, you can find that information freely on websites of VicRoads, the Victorian Building Authority, and state trustees. And so lawyers are irrelevant when it comes to finding out what the law is. The second role that lawyers have played is performing legal transactions. Now, I chose lawyers when I wanted to perform particular transactions like buying property or making a will, as my parents did and their parents did before them. But I didn't need to. For nearly 40 years, Australians have been able to use conveyances to transfer property and to use a will kit to make a will. A new technology reduces the scope for lawyers even further. We now have electronic conveyancing, which currently still needs an intermediary, such as a conveyancer or a lawyer. But that's a matter of design and choice. It's not a matter of feasibility. And when it comes to wills, online will kits are popping up all over the internet. Now, some are provided by lawyers, but many are not. They're provided by technologists or insurance companies or superannuation funds, or quite frankly, anyone who wants to provide them. Transactions like starting a business, entering a lease, buying and selling goods and services, entering a contract of employment, these are legal transactions which occur every day, and most of them are occurring without lawyers. And it's not just consumer transactions that no longer need a lawyer. For most people, their day in court is now a solo journey. Self-represented litigants are now the new norm. Depending on which court you're in and the type of legal issue you have, self-represented litigants can make up as little as less than 10% of parties in the federal court, but in state civil and administrative tribunals like VCAT, they make up nearly 100% of all of the parties. And this is possible because courts and tribunals have adapted their procedures and practices so most people don't need a lawyer when appearing. Forms are simpler and information is more freely available. Indeed, some courts have even started hiring staff whose sole job it is to help the self-represented litigants who appear in their courts every day. And so when it comes to performing legal transactions, lawyers are irrelevant. The third role that lawyers have traditionally played for clients is solving problems. Lawyers are equipped with the sorts of skills needed to solve any problems. We have the ability to take a large body of information, analyse it, identify possible solutions, and then communicate to someone else the various options and the benefits and risks associated with each option. Now, there is no doubt that we still need problem solvers. Laws, society, and our lives are becoming increasing in complexity, and we have more problems in need of solving than ever before. But ironically, this increase in complexity is another reason why lawyers are irrelevant. If I have a legal problem, it is no longer good enough to go to someone who knows the law. I need someone who knows the laws specific to my legal problem. Take common areas such as migration, tax, and employment. These are three incredibly complicated areas of law for which you need specialists. And the problem for lawyers is that they're not the only specialists in town anymore. Migration agents, tax agents, industrial relations advisors, and union officials. They may not know the breadth of law, but when it comes to their area of speciality, they do know the depth. And many people are choosing these types of advisors and agents for their specific problems, seeing them as more expert or specialised in the areas than a generalist lawyer or someone like me. And so when it comes to problem solving, lawyers are irrelevant. So friends, I came here tonight with a confession that I had been using lawyers when there was no need to do so. For all intents and purposes, lawyers are irrelevant to my life. They are irrelevant to the lives of most ordinary citizens. And while they may still have some relevance to organisations that love terms and conditions that run to 100 pages or more, their time is limited too. For as Annabelle will argue, if lawyers are not irrelevant now, they soon will be thanks to technology. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Raoul. So I will be arguing that lawyers will not be irrelevant. Firstly, I think Katie made some great points, but a lot of them were very focused on kind of a micro perspective. We're going to take a step outwards and look at the role that AI potentially will play in the future and why lawyers will not be irrelevant. So firstly, what is law? What do we expect from law that governs our society? So society desires objective reasoning, right, which is what we base our trust in legality on. But is it ever truly objective? Humanity is inherently flawed and irrational. Our sense of what is just is arguably an emotional one and not necessarily a rational one. I shall borrow a story from Sir Arthur Dean from his book, A Multitude of Counsellors, A History of the Victorian bar. So it was the early 20th century, the crime for stealing livestock was the death penalty. A young boy steals a sheep, and it is clear that he is 100% guilty of committing the crime, and he goes to trial. The jury returns after much deliberation and states the verdict. Your Honour, he is not guilty, as long as he returns the sheep. The judge, exasperated by this decision, tells the jury, you cannot base his guilt on whether he returns the sheep or not. The jury leaves, they return some time later. Not guilty, and he doesn't have to return the sheep. So the logic behind this outcome is inherently flawed, but it doesn't offend our sense of justice. We feel that justice may be served better, given that it was an irrational and illogical decision, as opposed to if it was a logical and rational one. That is what AI does. If we think of artificial intelligence at its basis, it functions backwards. So data is input into a data system, and then it makes predictions of the future based on those past outputs, right? So huge deviations in what is just and what isn't just can't be predicted by AI, and that's because we are unpredictable. I'd like to illustrate this point as well with a huge deviation from our society not that long ago. For instance, the famous Mabo case in 1992, where the High Court recognised Indigenous Australians as the true owners of this land. Up until then, the doctrine of terra nullius, meaning land belonging to no one, had been accepted and supported. If we relied on that doctrine today, we would see a huge injustice perpetuated by our Indigenous population, perpetuated by our justice system. It wasn't until lawyers advocated, along with Indigenous advocators, to change that doctrine. And that couldn't have really been predicted based on our past behaviours in the way that AI would predict. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Next up, we have Angela.
Hello. Hello. Is this the right height? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to narrow it again in line with Katie and actually look at the reality of commercial practices and how they're playing out and how new technologies have been developed and are developing at such a rate that is completely usurping traditional legal roles. And what lawyers do, what these new technologies do, they not only supplement legal work, but they actually replace the need for the lawyer. And the tagline for the two of us is that if lawyers aren't already relevant, then they will be soon. So I just want to begin by saying that law is actually quite ripe for automation. Facts and rules can easily be coded into algorithms. The facts of the data and the outputs of the agreements and the litigation stances that can be played out in numerous ways via different applications of factual settings and the rules that are being in place. So firstly, I'm just going to discuss a few of the new technologies that are currently in practice at the moment and then getting readily developed. First of all, we have expertise automation. These are systems that can solve procedural and substantive legal problems on demand, and they do so by providing specific advice or decision support for legal or compliance questions. This isn't typically, as you would discover, as what you think of as AI. It actually requires a human in the loop, being a legal expert or someone to input the information into decision trees. But once the lawyer or the expert helps put the legal reasoning out in the form of decision trees, these apps can therefore then go ahead and answer the same questions based on different people's inputs over and over again without the need for the lawyer. So what it does is it actually supplements or completely replaces the lawyer's legal reasoning skills. Secondly, we have legal research. Natural language processing is miraculous these days. And what used to be hours of a lawyer going through different cases and through different books and going to the library and trying to track down really old cases that you just can't find on Lexis can now be completed in a couple of seconds by legal reasoning tools. For example, IBM's ROS can actually find different factual legal scenarios. So when people say you can't automate that because computers won't be able to figure out the different cases that are analogous, well, IBM's showing differently, as is Casetext Sara, that you can actually scan a legal document, being a pleading, a memo, or a submission, and it will tell you all the other legal cases that you should refer to that are pertinent to the facts and issues that are in your case. Next, we have contract and document analysis. Same again, natural language processing can just automatically update contracts based on industry standards and a client's specific commercial needs. So again, that just gets rid of the lawyer who sits there going through clause after clause. E-discovery, that is such a massive revenue for big law firms. When I was a clerk, I remember one case was 17,000 documents, hours and hours spent. That can now be done through natural language processing, where you enter the keywords and then it can complete discovery by 75%. So all it does is just really narrow the documents available. So again, a huge part of the graduate lawyer's job is eradicated. Data analytics and prediction. Are you paying your senior counsel out $8,000 a day for advice on litigation when the current technologies can literally just say, all right, you've got this judge, well, he normally refers things to mediation, he's normally appealed this much, you're going to wait 8 months for a judgment, etc. And then, oh, this is your advocate, he's won this many cases, he normally loses cases that are about statutory demand, winding up, whatever. So it can put it down to the T, to a percentage of what your outcome of winning is going to be. So why would you need an experienced senior counsel's opinion when you can get that just from data? And what's really interesting with what's happening is it's not just the way that we're practicing law that it's changing, but it's the way that we administer law. Even judges and judicial reasoning are under the spotlight. For example, in the States, the judges in sentencing courts have been using Compass, which gives the likelihood of an offender re-offending. So it helps with pre-trial, parole and sentencing for the judges. We've also got China loves their robo-judges. They've sentenced about 15,000 people since 2016 in criminal courts. And in civil matters, judges in Shanghai People's Court, actually supplemented with AI bots, and also self-represented litigants can, before they go into court, actually get an AI machine tell them what the outcome of their case is likely to be. Netherlands does a marital app, which is now being trialled by the Family Court in South Australia, and VCAT is even trialling an AI bot for small claims. And that's just some of the stuff that's happening. But if we want to think about the bigger picture of law, smart contracting based on the blockchain is also going to be huge. So these are automated computer programs which are designed to self-execute. So once you have the conditions in there, you don't need a lawyer to construct the contract, and you certainly don't need people to pick up the pieces, because it's all going to be self-executed based on the pre-agreed terms. And what's happening with blockchain is it actually sparking the imagination of many non-lawyers to solve problems that are currently in the law. So for example, I earlier this year co-authored a paper on using the blockchain to fix problems in copyright law. We advocated for the use in global online registration systems for data right management and executing rights and terms, and for the automatic disbursement of royalties. And you don't need lawyers to do this. Currently, like an artist, Imogen Heap, started in Mycelia, which actually is trying to use blockchain for the same things that similar things that we were talking about. And this is artists that are just doing it for themselves without lawyers. So the last point that I'm just going to make in a broad spiel about what's actually happening in the legal sector is that lawyers don't have monopoly over legal work. So you can have non-lawyers running successful law firms like Andrew Mellett at Plexus, and you've also got law firms floating on the stock exchange. The big four, they're all taking over law now, and because they have such a broader range of resources to pull from, they're actually doing better at the big traditional law firms at innovating and using technology in the AI race. I've gone for a few job interviews for the role of legal knowledge engineer or legal technologist or legal analyst. So we had this new breed of law graduate that's coming out and being demanded, like this technical aptitude to supplement your legal training is sort of what's necessary these days. And if we think about how we're sort of usurping traditional graduate roles by using technology, then we really have to wonder, if we're making these roles redundant now, then who's going to be competent enough to run a proper legal case 20 or 30 years down the future? So it just goes to say that if lawyers aren't already irrelevant, then in light of all the new technology, they certainly will be in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle. To finish round one, Julian.
Good evening, everyone. Katie and Annabelle, the proponents, would have us, like Dick the Butcher in Shakespeare's Henry VI, kill all the lawyers. Now, I appreciate that really may sound like an attractive option, but I would ask you to lay the temptation to one side, because it's neither factually plausible that lawyers will be irrelevant, nor is it normatively sensible. It's not factually plausible because although I accept and I think it's actually very important that legal work is changing, and the changes that Katie and Annabelle have described are there and they're happening, there is no reason to suppose that this will make lawyers irrelevant. There may well be a question as to who are the lawyers. What are the skill sets that the lawyer of the future will have? Will we have a legal profession in the rather narrow sense that we recognise it today? But in terms of having human beings who are performing legal functions at a high level, I believe there will always be a place for those people in fundamentally a democratic society. Annabelle's claims in respect of artificial intelligence overstate both its short-term impact. Gartner in 2017 made the point that while we're at the tip of the AI hype cycle regarding machine learning, we're still up to 10 years away from significant adoption in higher level, certainly in higher level professional occupations. Computer scientists have been predicting since the 1960s that we are 20 years away from human-level machine intelligence. They're still predicting that we're 20 years or more. Some are actually saying 50 years from human-level intelligence. Even if or when we get to the point where there is a widespread adoption, it is likely that there is much that AI will still not be able to do, or certainly not do as well as humans. Empathy, advising on non-predictive or non-utility-based grounds, and ethical reasoning. There are many things that even a lawyer shouldn't do. And in some ways, I would rather have a human being making that judgment for all the flaws that may be involved in that than relying on technology. Because what if lawyers were to be irrelevant? Would we have achieved the utopia dreamed of by Dick the Butcher? I suggest not. Indeed, in the words of Joni Mitchell, and I hope I've not misjudged my demographic on that one, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. Had Dick the Butcher lived another 70 years, he would have encountered the English Civil War, when, in the words of a song of that era, law lay a-bleeding, and the world was turned upside down. Looking at the levels of disrespect for the rule of law that we're seeing in governments across many so-called democratic societies today, I think we need lawyers in many ways, now more than we have ever done. I invite you tonight to be careful of what you wish for. We need lawyers also to ensure that legal tech does what it is supposed to do. The English Law Society has recently set up its own ethics panel to help advise on ethical AI in the legal sphere because of the challenges of design and explainability that we know we will encounter with legal AI. Ladies and gentlemen, for that reason, I invite you to vote against the proposition in tonight's debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian. Well, that concludes round one of this debate. Could you please thank the debaters? We now move on to round two, which is questions for myself and you, the audience. There was a study done in Israel of a bunch of parole decisions that were made by judges. And what they found was that parole decisions didn't really happen on the merits of the case. There was a strong correlation between how tired the judges were, whether the judges had just eaten, and in fact there's a large acquittal rate just after mealtime. And so the question is, do you think that maybe if the outcome is justice, would we be better off leaving it to an algorithm rather than whether a judge is hungry or not?
Okay, so yes, human beings are fallible. So too is AI. The compass system that Annabelle referred to has itself been, which is actually not making parole decisions, it's making bail decisions. There's been a lot of issues in the US around the operation of Compass because there are concerns that the algorithm has not actually been well designed, and that it's taking a lot of considerations into account that it actually shouldn't be, and that the outcomes of Compass are significantly racially biased. So I think we've got to be really, really careful before we buy into the assumption that converting human decision making into a technological solution is going to give us the perfect rational solution. There's an awful lot of glitches, technical and human, in the way from that happening.
I just want to build on that because I think there's a real assumption that AI is kind of this superior being, but it's created by people. So surely if we're programming inputs, we would be programming our own biases into it. So maybe we exchange one set of biases for another. And I don't think it would be wholly perfect. It's still made by us.
Your response to that? AI or technology rather depends on past inputs rather than being progressive?
Well, I mean, until we can travel in time, everything's going to rely on past inputs. I mean, AI does give you the opportunity to do predictions, but it's still essentially our best punt at what might happen in the future. I think instead what I want to address about that example is that you can have parole without that situation that you've described of, the parole board making decisions is actually another example of where lawyers are largely irrelevant at the moment. Most people go and present to the parole board without any legal representation, and decision makers in parole are members of the executive arm of government. They're not necessarily judicial officers. So even if you don't go full tech, it's still an example that you don't necessarily need lawyers to make decisions on parole. And if you are fronting up for parole, then yes, it is best to do it after the decision makers have had something to eat.
I was hoping that I could get away with mentioning Compass without without there being a backlash of it. Yeah. So Compass was designed with about 100 and no one quote me, I think it's 147 different inputs. It was definitely in the 3 digits. And a girl from Stanford did a comparison of it with a few sort of quote-unquote jury people that had to consider 7 different outcomes. And their results for what they assumed that people's bail sentencing should be was really similar to what the algorithm of Compass came up to. So then I think it just comes down to the fact that, the bias of the machine came down to past human behavior and human biases. So I think when people talk about designing things about bias, it's sort of when they say, okay, well, we need different coders from different backgrounds and stuff to sort of try and mitigate against that. But I think at the end of the day, it's like the AI is not going to be perfect, and neither are we. And when we had this conversation about AI, are we going to be striving for it and trusting it to be perfect, or are we just going to be, okay, this can just help us a little bit streamline a lot of the messiness that we have? So I kind of feel like sometimes it's about letting go of expectations and also being prepared to tweak things here and there. But I don't think that necessarily has to be a lawyer that does it.
So then how strong should our reliance be on that? And what's I suppose what was the role of then lawyers or someone making sure that this technology doesn't get out of control?
Yeah, I feel like maybe you don't need lawyers. Maybe you just need professors like Julian to to sort of say, like, this is the grand scheme in life and law that we want to attain to. And then I think people with different skills can sort of make that happen within AI machines. And I think, like with anything, you want, like with being a professional, a lawyer, sort of having to live up to professional standards and professionalism. It's like you want to put out things that are good. So constantly reviewing machines and being also prepared to make changes when things go wrong. And I think a reason why we're hesitant is because there's like the black box issue where AI can't explain itself, but there's also like a lot of advances right now and a few papers coming out on how we think that we can make that happen, which I think will cool a lot of people's anxieties on how we use AI.
I think also Tara made a point that justice sometimes, more than having an objective of it, is a feeling. Do you think with technology that is possible to give us a feeling that this is just, or justice itself?
So I think that you can retain the sense of justice, whether you have humans involved or not, whether you have technology involved or not, because ultimately what is a just outcome is that sort of sense. There can be an individual sense of justice and there can also be a communal sense of justice. And we can still look at what technology is doing and say that is a just outcome or not. And I obviously agree with Annabelle that some of the best people who will be best placed to say whether something is a just outcome or not, or to really sort of analyse what machines are doing, are in fact academics. That's the role that they play in society at the moment. They currently look at what our courts and tribunals are doing, and they look at the trends and they say there's something not right here, and they are able to articulate why that is. So I think that function can continue whether you hand it all over to technology or not. There will still be individuals affected who will have a sense innately of whether it is fair or not, and I think that as a society we will also be able to look at what's going on and say, hang on, are we still comfortable with this?
Yeah, and just on that point as well, I think like you can still run a just case as if a self-represented litigant got their hands on some of the tools that I was talking about, they'd actually be way better equipped at running their case than they're not. Like we have a few self-represented litigants, and it's just a mess. And the judge I work for, it's a great strain, and it's a lot of patience trying to like educate them and let them be heard, and especially when they're not following legal processes and stuff. So if they have technology at hand to say, I can't afford a lawyer, but let me go through and let me do this, and actually there's all these really cool apps and designs now that allow me to do this properly against the cold heart barrister who's trying to, you know what I mean, who's just been briefed to like just run this guy to the ground or whatever. Some of it can be like heartening when you're watching it, and I just say like, oh, I wish I could make an app for this person to help them, because they can't get help otherwise.
So I think that goes to your Shakespeare point of hero lawyers.
In a sense, I think it does, and I'd turn this around and say I don't fundamentally disagree with anything that's just been said here, but it seems to me that as much as anything we have arguments there for how do we use technology to certainly to make legal processes more accessible, and perhaps as part of that we need to be thinking, well, how do we make lawyers actually more relevant rather than less? Because in part of what we're actually dealing with at the moment is a situation where lawyers are not sufficiently relevant to enough people, and actually maybe that's also an angle that we need to be exploring, rather than simply starting from the presumption we can get rid of the lawyers.
And just to that point, there's a question from the audience: is how important is human contact for ensuring the comprehension of legal advice?
So this is the idea that lawyers can explain to another person better, can explain things to a person better than technology can. Now, I don't know if you've met many lawyers. There are some great lawyers out there. There are also some lawyers who, do, I think, struggle in that sort of human contact. They might know the law really, really well, but they spend too much time in jargon and the language with which they feel comfortable rather than communicating like an ordinary human being. Now, lawyers have been trying to untrain themselves in legalese for decades. I am probably not well equipped to say whether or not they have been successful. I think I will leave it to you to talk to lawyers and decide whether they have freed themselves from legalese. At the same time, we have people who, increasingly are more comfortable with talking to their smartphone and sending things, on text message than they are, having face-to-face conversations or talking on the phone. My husband is absolutely an example of this. Our friends call and he hands the phone to me and says, "Oh, I don't want to talk on the phone. You talk to them. I'll text them later." So I think that, for some people, it really depends on who are the two humans involved in the conversation. If you have a lawyer who is really, good at the detail of what law is, but is not great at communicating it, and you have a client who is much more comfortable with text messages than phone calls, then maybe technology will explain it better than a lawyer.
That's a silly question. I should say that I'm not a lawyer, so my qualification for running this debate is about 10 seasons of Law and Order. But is there a difference between the practice of law and delivery of legal services?
I think there's bigger difference between the study of law and the practice of law and legal service. Can I just go back to your other point? I actually think it's great. Like, the reason why I got into because I'm a bit of a hippie. I love like all my yoga and stuff and just talking about emotions. And when I think about law, I think it's different, right? So in a commercial setting, it really depends if representatives of companies really want to sit down and go through all the jargon. But I think definitely when people are running cases, like criminal cases or administrative law cases, or when you've got people who have like my auntie's one right now where they've got a dispute with the neighbour's trees on her property and it's this big emotional thing, that they want to be heard by lawyers and they want to actually have communication. They don't know what the law is. They want to sit down and they want someone that's going to look them in the eyes and let them know that when they're running their case that it's all going to be okay. At least that's what I find anyway. So I feel like if you can sort of get a lot of the grunt work done, the stuff that makes a lawyer, I know when I had to do the discovery work, I'd come out of it being grumpy because it's just hours and hours of computer being what am I even looking at, because you just can't focus for that long. But I think if you can have more time to focus on those interactions, it's a good thing. And it will make the lawyers relevant way more than they are, because I just feel like so much of a lawyer's really good skills are just wasted just administering. My boss used to say to me, law is 90% admin and 10% terror. And it's kind of true. So if you can streamline it more, I think that's good.
But then wouldn't that make lawyers more relevant? That just changes the function.
Yeah, but you just do get all the technology to do all the terrorist, all the admin stuff, and then you just got 90% of good vibes and then 10% when you got court timetables. But you won't be stressed because the AI does it for you in seconds, so there's no crazy deadlines because you're all prepared.
Yeah, so document production, sure, but then keep the people dealing side to lawyers?
Yeah.
Great, so they're relevant.
Well, they're not relevant because it's going to be but it's going to be an augmented role of the lawyer. So it can literally just be someone that's really equipped at talking. It could be a psychologist.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to defining what a lawyer is, and it seems like technology will change the role of what a lawyer is more and more.
Absolutely.
And as society becomes more emotionally intelligent, we know the difference between emotions and legality, but at the same time our clients have this expectation to also be comforted and cared for, and you do more of that, more social work stuff, I feel sometimes.
So then lawyers will be irrelevant, but social workers will be more relevant.
But within the landscape of legality as well. So you have to navigate both worlds. So I think we can free up our time to spend more time face-to-face with clients by doing some automated things. But the bigger picture stuff is that people need other people.
So in the needing of other people, would you have to be a qualified lawyer to do that? Or could it be a psychologist or a social worker?
No, because they don't have an understanding of what the law is.
But the self-represented litigant coordinator at the Supreme Court doesn't have a law degree, and yet he does a really great job and he helps lots of people navigate the system. So it's just like, I don't know.
Just because some people can do self-representation doesn't mean that everybody can or everybody should. So I think that while we take an exception of some people who can run their own cases and run it successfully, we still have a huge proportion of society that needs lawyers. If someone is severely disabled, for example, they need an advocate. If there's something that's very emotionally intense for an individual, they need that space to have an advocate, which is how we came across in the first place.
I think that goes to my silly question, is what's the difference between the practice of law and legal services?
It's language. So lawyers have been wanting to be more commercial since the 1980s, so we stopped practicing law, which makes it sound like, a calling or a sort of religion, we practice it. And we decided that we were delivering legal services because that sounds more commercial and more what someone would buy. The fact is they're the same thing. And look, I think that a lot of the points that have been made about, that human contact, absolutely, people want the human contact. The question is, do they want the lawyer contact? And just think about yourself. If you ever have had a legal problem, how quickly are you going to pick up the phone to a lawyer? And my experience, both individually, my friends and family, my clients who I'm trying to get to pay me to do these things, we are really slow to pick up the phone to a lawyer. We will talk to a lot of people before we will talk to a lawyer. And for the last 40 years, we have been trying to train lawyers to be better with, human contact, to be more like social workers, to be more like psychologists. With technology, we now have the power to take the people who are already good at talking to human beings and give them a tool that they can then talk to human beings about the law and just cut the lawyers out entirely.
I think this still overstates it. I think, I'm pretty damn slow to talk to my dentist. You can kind of see where I'm going with this, I think. This is, to some extent, an issue of human behaviour and also how we respond to problem situations, not just a problem with lawyers. And I certainly don't, at the same time, don't want to kind of give the profession a clean bill of health on this one, because I agree there are more effective and much less effective lawyers out there as well. But again, I don't think that's a strong basis for saying per se that the whole lot of us should be irrelevant. I wonder if in some ways there is an emerging difference between the practice of law as we've traditionally understood it and the delivery of legal services. It's not here in Australia yet. In some other jurisdictions we're seeing, in most European countries, this kind of monolithic view of what a lawyer is much less entrenched in the psyche and in the regulations. So you have tax lawyers, you have business lawyers who aren't just lawyers doing a particular specialisation. They are actually trained to be those specialists in much the same way as doctors are maybe general practitioners, but they also may go into highly specialised fields through the medical college, the Royal College kind of system. In one sense, I would argue that rather than getting rid of lawyers, what we actually need to be thinking about is recognising even more of the complexity that Katie was talking about at one point, and saying we need to make our lawyers more relevant, more specialist, because that way we'll actually provide a service that genuinely reflects the complexity of the modern world, rather than this notion that there is a monolithic thing and indeed a monolithic training that enables everyone who starts from point A to get to point B, which is being called a lawyer.
I think that goes to a really good question here from the audience, is that what about really niche areas such as art lawyers or similar areas that require extreme expertise, and there's not enough data to build a sound algorithm? In that realm, do you see lawyers being relevant?
No. Because I think that when you look at something like, I think it was it art lawyers? So, an art lawyer is essentially somebody that, what I like about the idea of an art lawyer is that they are a lawyer that defines themselves by reference to what their clients want rather than by reference to the area of law that they find interesting. So to that extent, it's a good development. But ultimately, it's about saying, all right, well, what are the sorts of laws and what are the sorts of legal issues that artists come up against? There'll be something around small businesses, there's probably something about licensing, copyright, trademark, all those sorts of things. They are areas of law that have plenty of legal information, legal corpus that you would be able to train an AI machine on, and then the artist or somebody who is able to assist and guide an artist on these issues would be able to use AI machines to ask the sorts of specific questions that artists have. So I don't think the fact that we have become better at identifying the niches of our clients doesn't necessarily mean that it follows that you still need lawyers.
Yeah, I'm with Katie on that one, because when we talk about lawyers, I know I'm supposed to be, but I just didn't. I really believe it, Well, I think they tried to tweak it so I was on their side at one point. But the point that I want to carry on is that when I think about this debate topic and about lawyers being relevant or irrelevant, I think about lawyers as they are now. I think about going through law school, doing the priestly 11 and then picking your 7 or 8 or other subjects and getting a clerkship or a graduate program job and going through different areas of law to figure out, just figure out what's happening, try and get a handle on it all. All the people that I spoke to last year when I finished uni were like, don't specialise now. You just want to get your basic skills down packed. You just want to get exposure. You want to get experience, and then later on you go do your thing. It was the repeated advice from everyone, right? So we still had this view of lawyers that if you call someone up, they're going to be able to help you with your dispute. They're at least going to be able to define it for you or frame it for you, particularly if you are one of those people that don't know what your dispute is. And so if we're, as Katie said in her opening speech, and as Julian just mentioned about specialising, we've got people like, why do you need to go to law school? Why do you need to do those pre-C 11? Why do you need to just tick all the boxes, then go to College of Law if you're going to be specialised in one area? Why not just go to a school of art where a big component of that is like the legality of it? So then when you go to the AI machine or the AI bot for whatever it is, you're like, oh, I can work this. So it's more of like a legal technologist hybrid kind of thing that specialises in that area, which therefore means that lawyers, as we know it now, are going to be irrelevant because we need that high specialisation in the future.
So then aren't legal technologists a job?
Why not? We've got lots of legal technologist jobs already starting to emerge. I think it's one of the really exciting things about where we are in the marketplace now. We're seeing a real divergence. I think there's a challenge for folk like me in legal education and elsewhere to catch up with some of those developments and ensuring we're enabling people to have the right skill set to take those opportunities. At the moment, the system's relying quite a lot on folks like my colleagues here to go out there and do a lot of the work for themselves and get the grounding for themselves. That also needs to change.
Final question for me before I throw it open. In marketing, there's an adage that when you're selling power tools, that people don't buy a quarter-inch drill, they buy a quarter-inch hole. Just when legal services are, I suppose, delivered, do they have the clients in mind when they deliver service, or is it still that they're married to the status quo and they're married to the way the firm is structured, or currently how are legal services being?
Yeah, it's like walking a tightrope, I guess, like both. We have duties to all kinds of conflicting and contradicting areas. So I think at the end of the day, it is a service industry, and we're selling a service. So of course, it's just going to be tailored by what clients want and need. But then there is, the idea of the rule of law and upholding that as well. So it's complex. I would say too complex for a machine.
Yes, lawyers definitely do have, we have multiple obligations. First and foremost, we are officers of the court. And that's the thing. If you are a person with a problem, you don't really care about, these great sort of, things that are upholding our democracy, you just want to be able to sleep at night. You just want your problem solved. And I think that some lawyers are really good at focusing on, the whole and providing that sort of peace of mind and that comfort so people can sleep. But the easiest way of getting a good night's sleep is to resolve your problem as quickly as possible. And if you can do that without involving a third party, then you're going to be a lot happier. So there's a lawyer, Brendan Lakota, who is he's now with Justice Connect. He has described the role of a lawyer as making themselves irrelevant or sort of disposable to clients, whereas for a long time the goal has been to make yourself indispensable. The fact is that the best thing a lawyer can do for a client is to get out of the way.
Yeah, I just found that, like, coming out of law school, I started working with a lawyer in a boutique litigation firm when I was still in law school. But just one of the biggest things for me was the things that I thought were right or I thought were just were actually in practice, in the reality. It's like sometimes, like Katie said, you just need to settle, because it just can't, and just like the costs of running litigation are insane as well. So sometimes it is, even if you feel like your client's right, your client's got a sense of justice, like they can't afford to keep running it, or the stress of it is just eating away that they want to get on with their lives, so they settle. And working in insolvency and litigation as well, like there are just so many different rules for bankruptcy and insolvency and everything, but a lot of the time it's just such an interesting area because no one has any money anyway to do anything. So you come up with a variety of different creative solutions to solve problems, which was quite interesting. But yeah, and I think like judicial mediation is also really successful in that regard because people just want to create, solve problems differently sometimes.
Any questions out there? If you raise your hand, there's a microphone.
Repeating a question that I put on Slido, but I think Tara touched on this a little bit in her speech initially, but what role, if any, do lawyers have in updating laws or changing laws that might not really reflect how society thinks anymore?
I think we have huge sway, like lawyers have huge sway on how legislation is seen and interpreted in new ways. So I would say they play a huge role. For instance, maybe the asylum seeker legislation at the moment that allows us to detain people indefinitely. There's so many lawyers that are looking at ways to kind of get around that and sort of change how that's written, because it doesn't align with like morality. But even though that's the law and those are the parameters that we're dealt with, it's like innovative, fresh thinking from lawyers that will get us around those parameters. And you have to have legal training, but in the same way, you're not kind of bound by this backwards facing out like input. You can look at a problem from whole new angles. So I think that lawyers are incredibly important, and clients come with problems, and it's our job to try and find new ways to get around the law, I suppose.
I think that people are great at changing laws. And I don't think that lawyers have a monopoly on morality or democracy. We're important to it, like lawyers do play an important role in democracy, but we don't have the monopoly on it. If you look at, I think the asylum seeker debate is a great example of that. Lawyers have been taking cases to court for the better part of a decade, and we still have people on Nauru and Manus Island. And that is because every time there is a court proceeding, the government just changes the law. What will change the situation on Nauru and Manus Island is people power, and I think we've been seeing a lot of that in the last sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So I think that when it comes to changing the laws, it's always been in the hands of ordinary people to change the laws. And again, I think if lawyers get out of the way, people can see that they're the ones really with the power.
And I just want to say quickly, and I think there is an educative role for lawyers in that. I mean, one of the great things that I think we see in bodies like the community legal centres and the like is the way in which we see lawyers and non-lawyers working together on those sort of campaigns, engaging in actually empowering and enabling citizens as well. So I mean, I think getting out of the way, yes, absolutely, but actually being not in the way, but in the road in a really useful and supportive way is something there has to be space for as well.
Another question?
As well, just wondering about how important the quality of representation is to the outcome
especially in the higher courts. For instance, someone coming up against a Crown prosecutor for a criminal offence, how on earth are they going to be able to match that? I understand how AI or apps could work for summary offences or VCAT lists, but all things like corporate contracting, big, huge firms going up against each other, how would you see that working and being just and fair to the people without lawyers?
I think it's a really important question. Quality of representation is without doubt a significant factor. There's research studies out there that show, even actually at quite low levels. There was work that Professor Hazel Genn did 20 odd years ago, looking at tribunal representation, where it was evident from her data that representation there made a huge difference, even there in an environment which was supposedly designed for people to self-represent. So, yeah, absolutely. So, and I think what makes it even more subtle than that is that kind of data tends to point to the idea that almost any kind of representation is better than self-representation. It doesn't even have to be particularly good to make a difference, so long as the person who's doing the representation does know a bit more than the person being represented. So I think, representation does make a really material difference to an extent that we might not necessarily expect. That seems to me really is one of the crunch issues, therefore, that we're talking about making self-representation easier. Yeah, it's important because of the political situation we're in now, where legal aid budgets and the like are being absolutely slashed, because there are, for a lot of people, no alternatives. But I don't know that we can necessarily assume, or should necessarily assume, that technology is going to be the better answer to that. It may be the more expedient answer. That's a different thing.
So I think issues of representation are, when you boil it down, actually about power. So when you reference the Crown prosecutor, the situation there is not necessarily addressed by just giving the other person a lawyer, because the Crown prosecutor is still going to be the person who is in court every single day dealing with these sorts of issues, and you're still going to have the accused who is probably going to be facing court for the first time. And that situation, that unfairness, that sort of power imbalance is an intrinsic part of our system. I think one of the reasons why tribunals attempt to just sort of get rid of all of the lawyers and say we'll have the even playing field by having no one with representation is that you still had the problem of the repeat player. You still had the government, organisation who was there every day responding to applications made against it. What I think technology provides us with the opportunity to do is actually is level that playing field in a meaningful way, because rather than saying, well, you need to have a special type of human being who has special type of knowledge to, go along with you to your day in court, we can actually sort of say, well, with this technology, with this, AI machine, you can ask the questions and you can get enough of that information that you feel confident enough to go along and tell what is ultimately your story.
Yeah, a lot of litigation, it's just so much game playing. Just a big game of chess sometimes, and sometimes just because you have representation doesn't mean you're getting to the truth or the heart of the matter, or someone's going to do the law better than you. It just means sometimes someone might be more skilled at asking more manipulating questions when they've got a witness or something like that, which can sway the jury or the judge's opinion on certain things. And I think that if one, a self-represented litigant, is equipped with tools where they can actually know at least to say, well, this is the law that, I want his honour to, or her honour to listen to, and then this is my point, and I actually have something that's helping me put this down in legalese or in a logical manner, which shows the justice and the fairness. It's the judge can see through a lot of the the BS that happens on the bar. So I don't know. I think it's overall a good thing, even if they're up against a top QC, to just be a little bit more equipped with, what's the alternative,
Final question, if there is. At the back.
A lot of discussion tonight has been about grappling with the law after it's been made, so whether it's litigation or whether just wondering what changes you see perhaps in the way Parliament at both the state and the federal level is likely to engage with the technological changes that are coming, and how does that then align with the argument you're making tonight about how lawyers are becoming relevant?
So for the benefit of the video, the question is, we're talking about laws after it's made. What's going to be the consequences for the way that laws are made by Parliament? So I think that technology potentially has just as much role to play in Parliament as it does in our courts and tribunal systems. In America, they talk about this concept of law as code and code as law. As we start to use technology more, the rules of the game are just as much about the code that is in our computer programs as it is the laws on our statute books. And I think that parliaments will increasingly need to grapple with this. I also think that there is a real potential for parliaments to pass legislation that has an English text version but also has a code version. Because at the moment, when technologists want to take all of this law and make it accessible in things like, apps and other computer programs, they have to take the English version and they have to translate it into code. And one of the traditional arguments against using technology in law is, what happens if there's a translation issue? Well, if parliaments were actually passing both the English language version and the code version, you would no longer have that problem. Technologists could just stick in their little API and suck the code version out of OSLI or legislation.vic.gov.au, wherever it's sort of residing, and off they go. So you again then start to look at, even in Parliament, you may no longer need lawyers, you may need many more coders who can take the policy intentions of Parliament and convert it into something that technologists can use.
I actually agree with that. I think that is one of the areas where we are. We're certainly not there yet, but it's an area where there is scope for interesting development, and there are certainly a number of legal technologists who are really interested in this. Not so much just the interplay between law and code, because in one sense, when we talk about code as law, we're talking about something really fundamental here. We're talking about hardwired regulation. So we're talking about the form of law itself becoming something quite fundamentally different. And this is a slightly kind of mind-bending thing once you really start to think about it. And we're seeing this kind of regulation by design. I mean, almost in a sense, a technological extension of the idea of using architecture as a form of regulation. The way we design roadways, the way we design open spaces to make them defensible or to make them safe or whatever it may be. Well, this is the kind of thing one of the kind of things we're talking about increasingly in the legal space. The other possibility that I think is also consistent with what Katie was talking about is something that some legal technologists are doing, which is saying, can you actually create more certainty through code? So can you actually increase the operability of legislation by reducing some of the linguistic ambiguity that's shaped there in language? So the idea that you can actually create code that has greater certainty and greater effectiveness, therefore, than human language versions of legislation. It's a really interesting territory.
We might have to leave round two there. Could you please thank our debaters? And now, to finish off this evening, go on to round three, which is a 2-minute closing argument. Start with you, Tara.
So I think we've done a really good job of illustrating all the different arguments presented, but obviously I'm convinced that lawyers are still relevant. Firstly, there are things that we expect from law that governs our society that we are probably distrusting of AI and technologies to do. And there are really important pillars of our society that need to be upheld, and we will continue to be relevant. And whether or not we are relevant in the traditional sense of lawyers, or whether what a lawyer is changes and evolves over time, is a different matter. But I would argue that that simply broadens the meaning of what a lawyer is and makes us more relevant as opposed to making us irrelevant.
I would say that in summary, the lawyer, as we know it, is going to be irrelevant. I think that in light of all the changes in technologies that it's happening, and Julian said that it is true, like since the 1960s, scholars and technologists have been sort of thinking about how to automate law, and people kept saying, oh, in like 20, 50 years or whatever, it's going to be human intelligence, and that sort of like time frame has gradually just remained the same as the years tick on. But at the same time, a lot of the technologies and the changes that have occurred, like no one has imagined, no one has thought of. So it has come out of left field. So I don't think we should say with certainty that it's never going to happen, that we're going to have legal systems that can survive fully on the blockchain, or can be problems like a whole court matter that can just be solved by AI and run by AI with just like one person overseeing it. And I don't think that person overseeing it has to be a lawyer, at least not in the traditional sense. Maybe like a hybrid lawyer technologist / a specialist in a certain area. But I feel like the way that we are teaching law is going to shift. I think that people like Julian are still going to be really, really necessary. So people that can actually grapple with the whole body of law and the importance of law as a thing that we all need to uphold for us to all be living in this crazy world together. But I just think the practice of law is going to dramatically change, and I think that the lawyer as we know it is going to be irrelevant.
Thank you, Annabelle. Julian?
Well, certainly my thanks to Annabelle for telling me I'm not going to be made redundant in the next few years. Thank you for a stimulating debate. But I think the bottom line for me is that the proponents want to have their cake and eat it too. They want, in Katie's words, in her examples of conveyancing and housing, situations that are automatable, that are not particularly complex, but they also want technology and see technology as being a resolution of the complex. They think lawyers will be irrelevant, but only so long as we define lawyers in a particular way. Once we start to recognise or argue that technology may begin to redefine the nature and the role of the lawyer, the boat, I'm afraid, rather comes adrift. I think on that basis I would ask you again to vote against the proposition. Dick the Butcher got it wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. And to conclude this evening,
So I want to start my conclusion by saying that I love lawyers. I think that I am a lawyer. I've dedicated my life to the law. I think everybody here on this stage tonight loves lawyers. And I think that as a result, we all desperately want the negative to win. We want to, walk away tonight and go, it's all right, I'm still going to be relevant. And I think that, that desire has really shaped the negative team's approach to the topic tonight. They have done what lawyers have always done. If the argument is against you, just redefine the facts. And that's what they've done tonight. They've said, well, of course lawyers will still be relevant because we will just redefine what a lawyer is. But if we go back to what a lawyer as, the sort of ordinary person, the non-lawyer thinks of what a lawyer is, that idea of somebody who has special knowledge, and to be able to access certain solutions, you need to go to that special person. I think that idea has well and truly been shown tonight to be irrelevant, because every question that we've engaged with, we haven't necessarily gotten away with the humans, but we haven't held up this idea that you need to go to a special human to get your legal solution. And I think that, don't get me wrong, there may still be a role for some lawyers in the future. It may be that lawyers develop some sort of hipster cred so that on a Saturday you go and you experience law as it used to be done, and you go to an office and you actually talk to a human being and they walk away and take your legal issue, and 10 weeks later they provide you with a solution as well as a really hefty bill to do it. There may be people who still want to experience that. But if we look at what the vast majority of people will choose if there is another alternative that is cheaper, faster, and gives them the power to resolve their legal solution, their legal problem, then I think that it's without a doubt that lawyers will be irrelevant.
Okay, so that concludes the formal proceedings of the debate. Could you please, big round of applause for the debate. Okay. So, before the debate, the votes were lawyers will be irrelevant, agree was 13%, disagree was 61%, and undecided was 26%. After the debate, the agrees moved up to 22%, the disagree down to 70%, and the undecided to 7%. But what this means is since both votes moved by 9% exactly, it's a tie. So who knows what's going to happen? And thank you again to our debaters. That was fun. Give them a round of applause. And again, thank you all so much for coming tonight. If you'd like to join us, we're heading over for a drink at the Moat, which is just on the other side of the library, just below the Wheeler Center on Lonsdale Street. So we hope to see you there. If not, see you in 2019 for more debates. Thank you again.